In this section I'll show how I made these glasses, and I'll try to put in as many expert tips in there as possible to help someone efficiently use Thea Render. Since I'm using Cinema 4D, I will be showing some tips on how to effectively use Thea with Cinema 4D. The first thing that's important to have a nice photorealistic render is to have a nice model. The model should have all the details that the actual object has. The amount of detail is dependent on how close to the model we're going to be. In this case, we're going to be extremely close, so this model has to be extremely detailed. I've even put a little ridge on this part to cover the edge of the glass here, just as it would be in real life, to keep the lens in place. Here it's not needed because the lens won't move unless we move it, but in real life this does help keep the lens in place. I've also moved this so that the ridge is right up close to the glass. This is easy to do in Cinema 4D because this is made of two splines. If I look at this, I can easily pick a point of the spline, move it, and it updates this in real time. So that's very easy to do. The other detail here that might not be noticed is the curvature of the front part of the lens is a little bit more curved than the back part of the lens, just like it would be in real life for some reading glasses. To see the effect of this a little bit better, I've made some examples. This first example has both the front and back of the lens to the same curvature. The second example has the front lens bulged out just a little bit to give it that magnification that it would give in real life. If we see this from the front with the texture behind it, we can see that the texture is deformed just like it would be in real life. Right now I'm going to skip the material properties because that's more easily shown in the Thea Studio. But here I will show how to apply the materials. To apply the materials in Cinema 4D, select the material, drag it right onto the object, just like it would be done with a regular Cinema 4D material. Here I put 2 on there, so I'll delete 1. To replace the material on all the objects one material is applied to with a completely different material. A little trick to that is to right-click on the material, go to Select Texture Tags Objects, then drag over the other material to have it replaced with. And that replaces every single object that had the old material with the new material. Again, that's right-click, Select Texture Tags Objects, then drag over the new material. Now I'll go to my camera view, open up Thea Render, but first let's make sure that the settings here are correct. Under Render Settings, Thea. One very important setting is the units. If it's not to scale, it might not look right in Thea Render. Thea Render is a physically based render engine, so it needs things to scale in order for it to have the highest degree of photorealism. To demonstrate the importance of scale a little bit better, I've made these examples. In this first example, there's a cup of water to the right size, and over here in the background there is a person, but he's the size he should be, so we can only see his foot. In this next picture, I have the same cup of water, but as we notice, this guy is quite a bit smaller. He's so small that he could go in here and it'd be more like a swimming pool. The water is also quite a bit more blue because it is such a large body of water in this picture. Normally, we don't see this blueness of the water because there is such a small amount of it, but when it is in a huge quantity, this builds up to get this bluish color, which affects not only the water in this picture, but also the caustics that we have going on right here. And up here in the cup, which is perfectly see-through in this case, it actually affects the color within the cup as well. And if the cup had an absorption to it, it would also be a dramatically different color. In this case, it would probably be so dark, even with a minor amount of absorption, that we would not be able to see the slight difference in water, which is why I don't have absorption here. So scale can play quite an important part, and it is important to have it at least pretty close to scale, if not exactly to scale. In this case, I set it to millimeters. This unit setting here will override the setting here. So here it says meters, here it says millimeters. The millimeters will override the meter setting. So this meters can pretty much be ignored. Now that the millimeters are set, to check the size, I'll select an object and the size will pop up here. So it says here the lens is about 29 millimeters high. That is pretty much perfect for a pair of glasses. So this unit setting is good. I'm saying open with Thea Studio, and I have an image-based lighting that I'm using. Next, let's open up Thea Studio and take a look at lighting and some of these materials and some modifications that can be done in Thea Studio. So I'll click here, and after a very short period of time, the length of time dependent on how complex the scene is, this will pop up. Let's activate Interactive Render and enable Synchronous Display. If Synchronous Display is off, when this is rotated or moved, it goes back to the wireframe view, or whatever view is set down here in the model display. If Synchronous Display is enabled, it will stay in the interactive render even when it's rotated around. Right now the scene's too bright, so I'll go Properties, Exposure, and let's up the shutter speed to get this to be a little bit darker. That's looking better. Before the materials are gone into, we need to decide what materials we want to make this out of. That may seem easy, but it's actually quite complex. For instance, the glass part can be made out of glass, can be made out of plastic. If it's using the featherweight kind of glasses, it can be made of two different types of plastic or glass. The frames can be steel with a gold plating, steel with a nickel plating, can be made out of aluminum. If it has a gold plating, the gold plating can be 24 karat, 14 karat. This little plastic part here can be a harder plastic, which would be more clear, or it can be a softer plastic, which has more of an orange yellowish tint to it. So there's quite a bit of variance there. Next is the glass. For any glass within Thea Render to look physically accurate, the transmittance value should be set to perfectly clear, which is 255 for red, green, and blue. Then, if color is wanted, it should be set in the absorption. In this way, the color will be accurate regardless of the shape of the glass. If the color is set within the transmittance, the color will look more even throughout the glass and may not look physically accurate if the glass should vary in thickness greatly. In this case, I do want it to be perfectly clear, so I will set it to 0. Next is the index of refraction, and to get the right index of refraction, it has to be decided what kind of glass this is made out of. Is it crown glass, spectacle crown, flint glass, heavy flint, extra dense flint, arsenic trisulfide glass? Because each one of these types of glasses will have a different index of refraction. In this case, I'm saying it's crown glass, which has an index of refraction typically between 1.52 and 1.62. So this is somewhere within those values. Then to have Thea render accurately render the glass, the reflectance should be to 255. With this at 255, Thea render will figure out the correct amount of reflectance based on the index of refraction value that was set. Next is structure. Under structure, the roughness is extremely low. On glasses, they can be extremely smooth. They can be even smoothed out to 1 or 2 microns. So the smoothness is extremely smooth, but there should still be at least a little bit of roughness in there. For most glass materials, I'll put it at 1, but since they're glasses and they're extra smooth, I'll put this at 0.5. For the metal part, right now it's nickel with a roughness of 5, but I kind of don't like how the nickel is looking, so I'll change this out with a gold plating. To do that, I'll go over here to Materials, Metals folder, and pick this gold material. I could turn on the index of refraction file, switch this up with AU, which is the periodic table symbol for gold. Before was nickel, which is Ni for nickel. The index of refraction file uses the periodic table name for the element. But I'm thinking I want 14 karat gold. So I'll go over here and switch this out with this gold, which is not using an IOR file. I will also deselect the part I had selected so I can see it a little bit better in the interactive render here. It still has the material selected and I can still change these properties. It's just not selected here with the outline, so I can see it better. I'm also going to go here, disable auto refresh for this preview, so all that computing power can be used to more quickly update the interactive render. Now, to lessen the carats, I'd like to open up the Thea Color Lab, and it's very easy here to lessen the carats. Just move this down, and this will give the effect of fewer carats. So that's maybe looking more like 14 karat gold, around that area somewhere. Next, let's look at this little rubber material right here. Zoom up on that, which is very easy because we'll notice how smooth this is actually zooming up on the object. In the interactive render here, it's a biased render, so it actually has a tracing depth. That's why there's these black parts. To change that, go to Properties, General. I'm going to up the tracing depth until the black part goes away. The engine core in the interactive render can also be set to unbiased, which will give unbiased results if the tracing depth is set high enough. Next, I want to change color a little bit. Under Absorption, let's make it more yellow. And I'll up the absorption. So that's looking more like the color of the squishy material normally used for this plastic part, when it's actually more squishy. Another thing I've done here to just add a little bit to the realism is to have a very slight amount of a normal map here. 2% is very, very slight. Maybe I'll make it 3% to make it stand out a little bit more. If I make it 100%, it's absolutely too much, as can be seen. But because this plastic is so soft and does deform so easily, it will have a little bit of distortion to it. To simulate that, I put this little bit of normal map on there. And it has a slightly higher roughness than the glass because it is that soft plastic. I could even up this a little bit more if I wanted. So that's looking pretty good. Again, moving with the synchronous display on, enabled right here, it stays in the interactive render and it moves very smoothly and easily. To get back to exactly the same camera view, I can go here to the camera, select it, click on go to selected view, or middle click on the camera. The last thing I want to change is the image-based lighting. I don't quite like how this one's looking, so I'll go to Environment, IBL, change this out with a different one. So 23 looks like a good one right there. I'll use that one, open that up. It's a little bit brighter, so again, Properties, Exposure, let's turn that down, maybe a little higher. Click Refresh to update it. Now I can rotate it. And I kind of like it right there because I have this reflection in the marble. That should look pretty good in the final render. So I'm liking how that's looking now. I do recommend to take any changes here and go back to Cinema 4D, open up the material here, make the changes, then save it, so that when the file's opened again, this exact same render can be had the first time without making these changes in Thea render. But for now, this is looking good, so I stopped the interactive render. Let's go to the darkroom. Notice that the ISO and shutter speed has been changed here to match the exposure setting as set here. Make sure the engine core is the one we want to use. I like to use high super sampling because even though it does take up a little bit more memory, it will add a little bit more sharpness and quality to the final render. So if you have the extra memory, the rendering speed is about the same. Now press start. Make sure the correct camera is picked and the correct resolution. Press play and this window can be maximized by clicking there. As it's rendering or after it's done rendering, at any time these settings can be changed, like vignetting can be added to give it a nice dark border to focus in on the glasses better. How bright the image is can be adjusted with ISO and shutter speed. And it doesn't start re-rendering when we change these settings, it just keeps on going, making it look better and better. So these can be easily changed at any time. And here's what the final product looks like. Hope you enjoyed watching this. Happy rendering.